Hey, on this episode of the Ethics Experts, I talked to Angie McPhail, and you're going to absolutely love her. She was part of one of the greatest programs that have ever existed that got so embedded inside the organization. So as you listen to this episode, really tune into this theme that recurs over and over again of focusing on the business, focusing on the people that she's serving, that curiosity that ends up opening the doors and gets you invited into the conversations that you should be a part of. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
How's it going, Angie? Welcome to the Ethics Experts.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate you having me.
I am been very excited for you to come on. Like I always say when I mean it, the pre-show is always a good indicator for the type of episode that we're going to have. We had such a phenomenal conversation then, and I'm really excited to dive in. You've had such a really cool career. And you're somebody that I think really gets the role that compliance can play, that ethics and compliance can play in an organization, not just to keep the company out of trouble, but to really mobilize the workforce and, drive more improvement, drive a company forward. So I always like to start with this question of what were you like growing up? What kind of a kid were you? What were some of those early experiences that, maybe at the time you didn't see that it was setting you on this path, but now that you look back, you can kind of see how those lily pads you kind of hopped across got you to where you're at.
Good question. I thought a lot about that question in terms of thinking back to my childhood. And I would say naturally I was very independent and very curious, and was always comfortable wanting to understand the why behind something, just not following the rules. And maybe that is a result of being the youngest of three in a family. So I was fiercely independent and very curious.
Yeah, the youngest, they always seem to grow up faster. They seem to have more confidence. What was the age difference between your siblings?
So my oldest was 6 years older than me, and then the middle was 2.5 years older.
Okay, so you were all pretty close. And
we were all pretty close, relatively speaking, yes.
Yeah. So, all right, so you're this independent kid. What did you do sort of after high school, and how did that lead you into the compliance space?
So what did I do after high school? I went on to college. And then I took a year-long sabbatical, and I traveled to Australia and New Zealand and all over there, which, certainly helped shape who I am now, both as a leader and a compliance professional. So how I got into compliance was kind of unprecedented, is that my background is organizational training and development. And so I worked for Nortel Networks at the time after my sabbatical and coming back and trying to make some money and get my feet on the ground and find a job. I landed at Nortel, and I was in the HR group, and I led a couple of global programs for new employees and new managers, and with focus on OD type things. And so the chief compliance officer at the time approached me and said, "Angie, I'd love for you to join my team." And I said, "Okay." She said, "I need your skill set." I said, "Great." I said, "I know nothing about ethics and compliance other than what I signed when I first started." And she said, "It doesn't matter. I'll teach you." So lo and behold, I joined her team and headed up their training and communication strategy, multi-year strategy for the organization.
You said you took that year-long sabbatical in Australia and New Zealand, and that really shaped who you are. That's obviously a very impactful thing, right? Living a year in a different country on the other side of the world. What was it about that experience that, were kind of real building blocks or foundational for the person that you've become?
I think, spending that year away from my family, which we're a very close-knit family, and having to kind of figure things out on my own. That goes back to that curiosity, the independence, and really trying to figure out, navigate that situation, a new country, new people, new culture. I mean, all of that helped me to appreciate, what I believe to be one of the central parts of what we do as ethics professionals is the culture piece, right? And the behavior. So it really helped me it opened up my very narrow view of life to a much more expanded view of life.
Yeah. And that's such like a confidence builder, right? Like you're going to this new country.
Oh, for sure.
And there's like so much stuff that you just have to figure out. I mean, granted, you spoke the language, I guess, if that is English. I don't know if it qualifies or not. But what were you doing down there for a year?
Well, it's funny you should ask. It takes me back. So I went there and I'd worked in college in Northern Ontario in a resort. And there was a family that sent their sons over to learn how North Americans ran their hospitality industry. And so when I went to Australia, I reached out to one of those individuals that came over and said, I'm here. And so they landed me a job in one of their new hotels just north of Sydney.
Cool.
And so, yes. So I arrived there it was a work abroad program. I think there were 15 of us that were accepted from Canada. And I arrived in Sydney, rented a car, drove 2.5 hours north up to Brisbane and, met with Andrew. And all of a sudden I'm working in this restaurant.
Wow.
And so I had to find a place to live. So I lived in an apartment right on the ocean. I had to find a roommate. So I found a roommate. And he was Australian, so that was super cool. And I was just over there, working from job to job, mostly in the hospitality industry. I was joined by a friend. We rented a car and drove across to Perth. We ended up working with Alan Bond and sailing one of his yachts back to Sydney after the America's Cup. Yeah, super fun.
That's crazy.
I mean, it was crazyville in terms of some of the stuff and risks that I took during that time. And here I'm, that's before, access to computers. So I'm writing these letters to my parents and they're getting them and they're like, oh my gosh, what's she doing?
She's in Perth now.
Right. Now I'm in Perth. Now I'm living in the house of a guy that he was a helicopter pilot for the America's Cup. So he'd take people out to watch the race. And anyway, pretty crazy stuff.
How crazy. And then was that like a pretty long road trip?
From Brisbane to Perth, it was about a week. And we camped because we didn't have any money.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Even like a road trip like that, it's just like constantly figuring stuff out. I mean,
flat tires.
Totally.
The highway, the bitumen was so hot. It was crazy.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And that country's pretty big, right?
It is. It's massive.
Yeah. Wow. Well, how cool. That's a whole movie right there.
It is. I should probably write a book because from there we were back in Sydney and we were living in one of Alan Bond's, who's now in jail. I don't even know if he's still alive. One of his very exclusive apartments, which was phenomenal. And then we went to New Zealand and spent a month in New Zealand and then the Cook Islands. And then
how cool. So what made you want to do a sabbatical? That's such an awesome chapter of your life that a lot of people don't sort of carve out time for,
It's funny you should ask that because I have 2 kids that both took gap years and I was so wholeheartedly against it.
You were,
but they were like, well, Mom, that's you
gap year for me, not for thee,
You're not for you. I was young going into college. And so I just felt like I wasn't ready to go into the workforce and I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. So I just felt taking a year off and exploring another countries was probably going to enhance who I was as an individual and provide clarity in terms of what it is I wanted to do.
So how do you feel like that experience maybe pushed you into the learning and development space? And how did that kind of allow you to be maybe more impactful there? Because you must have been pretty impactful for that compliance officer to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, I want you to join my team. She must have seen some things in you.
Did. I think she saw how I led those teams, again, going back to how I was as a child, very curious. And I think I lead with curiosity and critical thinking, and I really encourage people to challenge those assumptions and focus on helping the teams understand the intent rather just the requirements.
Right.
So I think that it's my leadership. I think it was very foundational in terms of my leadership style, about accountability and trust. When you do a year sabbatical like that, you have to be accountable, right? You have to be able to trust, your decisions that you're making. And so creating an environment where people feel empowered to speak up, I think, and think independently and take ownership of their outcomes has been probably something that she saw in me and how I led those teams, those global teams.
It's an interesting connection, because your first answer was about how you were very curious and you always wanted to know like the why behind the what. And when you talked about, how you do training and how you kind of got into that space, you mentioned that you wanted to kind of give people the intent behind whatever you're learning. It's interesting to me that like that approach ultimately ends up building a lot more trust, because you're treating the other person like an actual human being who probably wants to know the why. Why do you think so many people struggle? Not so many, but so many people struggle with that sort of concept that, we're very good at sort of saying what people need to do, but we kind of miss out on that sort of linchpin of like explaining that why, or explaining the principle behind whatever the concept is, not just in sort of work or, trainings and stuff like that, but just kind of in life. What do you think that is? Is that too much of a self-focus? Is it a lack of empathy? Is it just trying to get through kind of onto the next thing? Like, what do you think that reduces down to?
I think it's all of those things above, check all of those. I do think inherently people are generally insecure. I don't know. And so I think that they feel that they need to hold the room and to be the ones that are, delivering the message. It goes back to the discussion that we had about active listening, right? The lost art of active listening. I think that for me, I like to surround myself with people that are smarter than me. I think that in itself is, an opportunity to learn from folks that have those different skill sets. And it goes back to, the why, not just the what.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know if I answered that quite.
No, you did. And, I think what you said really stuck out to me, which is like everyone's kind of insecure. And I think when you're insecure, you're really focused on yourself. And if you can kind of turn that outward, it makes active listening easier. You can kind of understand this other person, and it just opens up so much, when you feel like you have to hold the room, it's really, you really focus on yourself. If you feel like, hey, I'm here to kind of, learn and help and, help other people around me. You can't be curious and defensive at the same time. And like insecurity in its nature is sort of a defensive posture,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I've always, back to your earlier question, I've always led with that, seek to understand kind of mentality. Very much so. And that I don't have all the answers. And I think that that's what's made me such a trusted advisor in my role as a compliance professional, is that, it's not about rules based. It's about understanding the business and then solutioning accordingly so that you're not creating friction for the business. Totally. And I think that that's why, I've been so successful in this role, is that leaders trust me. I collaborate with them. I'm not trying to stifle the business. I'm trying to enable the growth of the business. And so by doing so, I get invited around the table to help solution those issues. And I may not have the answers. I can provide, and the answer is not always no. Oftentimes I think a couple of times in my career, I've said no. For obvious reasons, but it's really trying to find a workaround to enable the business, not to stifle.
Yeah. Or not to just like ram your agenda down someone's throat or push your initiatives over everything else, because we're all kind of parts of a business, which are parts of a whole, which are supposedly trying to work together for like some kind of an organizational mission. Something else you said, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say is oftentimes I find myself, especially in my last role with Juniper, is, I work very closely with the sales organization, the channel and sales teams. And there was oftentimes, email of 15 threads. And it was like, come on, folks, let's, all right, I'm going to set up a meeting and bring all these
pick up the phone, have a face-to-face. Totally.
Let's just and let's talk to one another. Let's listen to one another. Like, what are we trying to solution here for?
Yeah. And there's so much miscommunication on that 15 email thread. People are talking past each other. They're assuming the worst, and it's just like, if you can just, whenever there's kind of a conflict in my business, my first question is usually like, have you spoken with this person? And they're like, no, but did you see the emails? And I was like, just Slack them, or just pick up the phone and just like have a conversation. Cause it seems like 80% of like conflicts are due to some kind of a misunderstanding or not being able to sort of see it from the other person's perspective. And usually, most people are kind of like rational actors, right? Like usually there's a piece of information that I might not have, or they might not have, that if you can talk instead of volleying freaking emails back and forth, you can get to that answer faster. And I think that kind of an approach, kind of leads me to what I was going to say. You mentioned that like you kind of became this trusted advisor and you got invited into these things. And I think a lot of people in compliance are frustrated by the fact that they want to be a trusted advisor. They view themselves as sort of hitting some kind of a brick wall or something. I hear so many times I should be part of that conversation. And I think that kind of an approach or that kind of a frame is the wrong frame. Like, we can't think in should. You have to kind of think in what is. And if you're not getting invited in, there's probably something that you could do a little bit different to build that relationship or understand something from their perspective, or see how you can, to your point, get something unstuck or find a workaround to where somebody can start to see like, oh, this person's actually value add. I was talking about this on a call or on a webinar, I think recently, but like people are going to be focused on themselves, and people are, they're just inherently self-focused. They care about their own agenda more than they care about your agenda or my agenda. And I think when we can, weave in our agenda to their agenda, or see that it's not sort of in conflict, but rather it can be a tailwind for them, then they're naturally going to invite you in. I should be invited to the party. Well, like if you're not invited to the party, there's probably some reason,
Right. And that was the case. I mean, it even extended beyond my role in compliance. I was invited to sales kickoffs. I was invited to partner retreats. Like they saw the value. And I went from, it was funny when I first started with Juniper. It was COVID. I was a COVID hire, and I went on a listening tour. That was sort of my MO, right? To talk, because I was responsible for the Americas. So, okay, let's align with all the leaders, because I don't even think there was alignment around what compliance meant within Juniper at the time. And so that was really valuable. And I think that was sort of put me in the right mindset for folks, is that, she's not here trying to jam her agenda on what's right and wrong. She's here to listen and understand where the pain points are in the organization, to learn the business and to find out about them, to learn about them and their leadership style. And I think inherently those things worked to my advantage over the years.
Yeah, there's like nothing more dangerous than somebody who's like seen it all. And this happens a lot with like sales consultants, or maybe just humans in general. But I was just talking to somebody about sales consultants, how they all got a playbook and they know exactly what you need to do. And they come in with their playbook, and like there's nuance in every business and there's nuance in every market and stuff like that. And I think when we can seek first to understand, you have a much higher likelihood that whatever frameworks that you've accumulated or whatever tools you've accumulated in your tool set from all of your experience can actually land and actually create that leverage, because you have a better visibility of what the actual dynamics are. When somebody comes in and they're like, here's what you got to do, it's always kind of like a red flag for me.
Yeah, no. And it was important to create a brand within the organization of that, trusted advisor. I'll use that word again. And it really worked to my advantage. And that would be the approach that I would take, going forward.
So when you got tapped on the shoulder and were invited into the compliance team. You didn't know anything about it. That compliance officer saw something in you. What was like an event or something where you were like, oh man, I found my home?
Well, I'm going to date myself, so I'll be careful what I say here. It was soon after I joined that team that I went to do you remember the Ethics Officers Association, the EOA? Okay,
Yeah.
I've kind of dated myself by even saying that. I got invited to a conference. I think it was in Austin at the time. And I, didn't know anyone other than my boss was there. And I just started working the room. And I do that well. You put me in a group of people and I can work the room. And I just had some fascinating conversations with individuals. And I was, of course, on this huge, steep learning curve, right? On what it is to be an ethics and compliance professional. So it was really that event that sealed the deal for me.
And what were you hearing? Like, what were folks saying that you're like, oh man, this is freaking awesome?
Well, back then, the ethics landscape was very different. It was very policy driven, right? Whereas now it's more behavior, culture driven. It's transformed significantly in the last 5 years, even less. And so I was just hearing about stories, scenarios about different things that were happening at different companies, stupid things that people were doing at sales kickoffs. I always say that I feel like I'm the People magazine of corporate America. It's like, sometimes I like, how do people think up these things to actually do? Like just poor behavior. So I was hearing things about misconduct. I was hearing things about, learning about investigations and how cool that was. I was learning about what's going on from what's hot in terms of training and communications. So I was hearing all kinds of snippets of those buzz things that make for a comprehensive ethics and compliance program. But more it was the anecdotal things, like the stories. I mean, that was like, all those scenarios are things that people do. I was like, holy cow, really?
This is really happening. Yeah.
This is really happening. So I think that really sparked my interest and, desire to want to learn more.
So, what are some of those lessons from your early career? You were at Sun and you were at Nortel that were, some more of those building blocks for the compliance professional that you've grown into and the one that you are today? I
think, early on with Nortel and Sun, it was the importance of culture. Compliance works best when it's embedded, as you know, into the day-to-day behavior. It's not just policies, right?
Right.
Collaboration, I think, is important. Take away from those early days. I had to collaborate in order to learn, right? And collaboration also drives effectiveness. And practicality matters, right? Complex rules are only effective if they're understandable and actionable.
Yeah.
Right? And leadership sets the tone. I think that tone at the top, that witnessing how leaders' behavior influence risk-taking, or how can't even talk. Witnessing how leaders' behaviors influence the tone at the top.
Yeah, and how that example sort of like trickles down to the rest of the organization. Because I think people can see it and they can see if that tone at the top is real or not, or if all these things are just kind of platitudes, these values are words on the wall, or if these policies actually matter or not.
Yes, and I think that early in my career, I've been fortunate that the leadership has been there. It's been real. It's been evident. It's been actionable, and supportive.
So how long were you at Sun and
okay, now you're aging me again.
All right, we can move on. But
no. I was at Sun. I was at Nortel I had 5 or 6 years in Sun Microsystems, probably another 6 years, and then moved on to Yahoo. And I think an interesting point I want to make is that the team that I was with in Sun Microsystems was the same team I was with at Yahoo. So it was probably a 10 or 12 years. So it really speaks to, the chief compliance officer at Sun Microsystems who moved to Yahoo, Sun Microsystems to Yahoo. That spoke a lot in terms of the culture of the team.
Well, and there was a lot of change happening at all those organizations at that time.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, so those 5-year stints were like 10 years or 15 years somewhere else, Well,
with Yahoo, you remember the days of Carl Icahn and aggressively trying to take over Yahoo. And so we had, 7 or 8 CEOs in that period of time.
Yeah, because he was so active.
He was so active and so aggressive in his intent.
So what implication did that have, that revolving door of CEOs? I mean, that's a lot of CEOs in a very short amount of time. And that's a lot of people. So you've seen a lot of different sort of like flavors of leader come in and a lot of different approaches, right? Like everyone's got their own path up the mountain. Everybody has their own playbook and the levers that they pull. What of those, you don't have to name names. It probably can't even remember 7. But like, what are some of the things that you saw from those new leaders who were kind of making their way through the organization that like, you were like, oh, that's pretty good. Or that you were like, man, this person's really kind of missing the mark.
There were, at the time, I remember, if I think back, there was obviously a lot of instability and a lot of unknown, right? So we weren't really able to execute on our agenda as we had wanted to. And that I'd like that to the last 18 months at Juniper, right? We were, the announcement of the HP acquisition, it was on, it was off, we're litigating, now we're not.
So much uncertainty,
Yeah, it was a lot of disruption. And with disruption, it's hard to execute on your plan. You're having to, it's a lot of stop start. It's a lot of deprioritizing, reprioritizing, what's important based on, the views of this new leader in that role. So I remember it being a very disruptive, uncertain time.
Which is so frustrating, right? Because you have a vision, right? Like you have your own vision for like the kind of initiatives you want to push and the, aspects of the program you want to build out. And you just kind of keep, like the engine keeps dying or something.
Well, it does. And then the last CEO of Nortel, it was a woman. I'll just leave it at that. And she did away with all work from home. So I don't know if I've mentioned my entire career, apart from Nortel, was always remote. And so she came in and she did away with all remote workers. And so I lost my job, which was, I've been with this team, 2 different companies for over 10 years. I mean, it was awful. It was an awful period of time. And so I took the time to pivot and figure out what I wanted to do. So that's when I started my own consulting business for 8 years.
And so let's talk about that, because that takes a certain amount of courage. That takes a certain amount of, entrepreneurialism, and, entrepreneurs, I think, are just kind of problem solvers. What gave you the bravery to take that plunge, right? Like, it sounds like you got a little bit blindsided by that work from home thing. You had some time, you kind of decided to do this pivot. Talk to me a little bit about what that was like, what some of those early days, I mean, because you made it to 8 years, right? Like 90% of businesses fail in the first year and then another 90%, so to make it to 8 years is a huge achievement. But when you're starting, you have no idea if it's going to be successful or not. You're kind of like staring, it's got to be like it's like a bird kind of standing on the edge of the nest for the first time and being like, I don't even know if I can fly. I don't know if these wings work or not. So talk to me through like what gave you that courage to take that plunge.
Well, I wanted to try my hand at it. I wanted to kind of be my early experiences. I wanted to be, in control of what I did, who I worked for, what opportunities. So you're right. It was very scary. It took a lot of courage. I think what led to my success for those 8 years were the relationships that I had built outside of the organizations that I was with. So really maintaining my network helped and led me to land consulting opportunities at different at different organizations. So I was with Intel for a year, for example. I did a sabbatical coverage for a year. So that was a year of 7 where I wasn't, looking for my next opportunity. Because with consulting, you're always looking over your shoulder. What's going to be my next opportunity? We have bills to pay. Is it going to be feast or famine? And so I was really lucky that through my network, I landed opportunities, and there never really was a lull within those 8 years. I mean, I could have had more on my plate at any given time, but that year at Intel really helped. And it was a time that we were transitioning from the West Coast to the East Coast. So it gave me broader flexibility to be able to be a little more choosy, pick and choose of what I wanted to do. And it gave me insight into different industries outside of technology, a little bio, retail, pharma. I mean, it provided me some insights and learned what I definitely didn't want to do and what I did, because there were things during that time that I did that I was like, ugh, really? Why am I doing this?
Yeah. Which is such a great, part of it's like getting some experience. Part of it is like getting more patterns for your pattern recognition, because so much of life is just sort of, it's pattern recognition, and if you've seen something or the shape of something, before, then you can maybe get to the answer, get up a J curve a little bit faster. What were some of the big lessons from that? Because, all these things stack, right? Like there's just more and more tools in the toolbox. But if you look back at those 8 years, what are some of the big, learnings you had? Maybe it was in a different industry or something like that you've been able to kind of carry forward, like almost as like an operating principle or a first principle or something.
My biggest takeaway, and why I jumped back in to why I shut down my consulting business, is that as a consultant, you only have visibility into so much, right. and that varied depending on the different, the opportunities. And my last opportunity was, so I live in Sun Valley, Idaho, and my last consulting role was in Boise. And I got to the point where, when we go back to people being self-serving, is I worked with a group of individuals that I didn't feel had my back.
Yeah.
That they were there to leverage whatever institutional knowledge I had to their greater good.
Yeah. You didn't feel part of it. Yeah.
Right. And so, you felt very much on the outside, and that I felt to some degree is that I'm here for them to glean information from, to use for their behalf. And they weren't upfront about that being an intention, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think,
it does make sense. And then there's not that reciprocity. You feel like you're outside of the tent. It's a lot of taking, not a lot of giving, and vice versa,
Right.
Or not vice versa. Yeah.
Yeah. So that, hopefully I haven't said too much, but anyway, that was my biggest takeaway. And so when this opportunity came at Juniper, it was through another chief compliance officer from my network that sent it over to me, and I looked at it and I was like, yeah, I can do all those sort of core wheelhouse operational things, investigations, conflicts of interest, training and comm, all those. But what really struck me was the working with, and I've alluded to this earlier, working with the business. Yeah. And I was like, I'm not going to get that role because I really haven't had that experience. I mean, It's been very surface with the other organizations. It hadn't been it wasn't as intentional. And so, Nick, I've never gone through an interview process so quickly as I did with Juniper. I mean, it was the general counsel or the chief compliance officer at the time, who was friends with the chief compliance officer that recommended me, said, "You're friends with her? Okay, green light on."
Phenomenal.
And the general counsel, actually, at the time, I'd worked with at a previous company. So
you're kind of a known quantity on kind of two fronts, on
either side.
And you had kind of continued to build this network. You worked you go from kind of working the room to now having opportunities fall on your plate when you're a consultant, to now getting sort of recommended for this permanent position in what sounds like a really cool program. What was it about that Juniper program that was, you've described it as so embedded with the business. You've described it as best in class. I want to hear about what made it best in class, but I want to kind of back up a little bit. Like, what were the circumstances in that organization? Because you had just seen a bunch of organizations. You had worked in a bunch of organizations before that. What was it about sort of the environment there, or that kind of made it sort of fertile soil or fertile ground for the compliance team to actually be embedded in the organization? Because a lot of people want that. A lot of people want that in their organization, but some people feel like they're throwing seeds on a parking lot or something. Like, nothing ends up really kind of taking root, and that sort of circulatory system sort of ideal is never really achieved.
Yeah, I think with Juniper, we had a new chief compliance officer come in. So there was kind of a transition. So I was transitioning in, the old one was transitioning out, a new one was transitioning in. So I think what fostered that sort of business partnership with the organization was the tone that we collectively set as a group. So I was the Americas. We had someone coming in that was the theater head, we called, from APAC, and there was someone new in EMEA. So collectively, we got to shape kind of the strategy for how we wanted to be perceived within the organization. And that was, to your part, is being embedded in the organization, not being this bolt-on. Kind of risk-based policy, Dr. No kind of mentality.
So you didn't step into that. You helped kind of create that. You had these different folks in this team that seemed like you were very aligned with like sort of a shared vision, and were able to kind of sing in harmony across this massive organization. Yes.
And so we had, obviously we all collectively had ownership of that. I think that was largely due to the vision that the chief compliance officer had. He was very much a proponent of collaboration, shared vision. He wanted us all to be aligned to something that we could feel proud of. So how did you guys go about doing that, right? You're stepping into an organization so you didn't step into a best in class program. You and your team, you guys built this best in class, fully embedded organization, within your company. How did that, what steps did you take? What were the major sort of moves on the chessboard that allowed you, and how long did it take? It took a while. We called ourselves ICG 1.0. That's what we started, was kind of our mantra. And this was during COVID. So I hadn't even met any of the team in person. Okay. This was all done remotely. So you overlay that in terms of the success of the program. And I think that kind of speaks volumes too. And there was a certain immaturity at that time about this work from home thing, right? That was a new thing for everyone to kind of figure out. Right. And it wasn't new for me. It was easy for me, but certainly for the other members of the team. So again, I speak to the vision that our chief compliance officer had, and how he worked with us to kind of shape that vision so that it was a reflection of what each of us saw as being a value add to the organization, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it was. We sat in a room. Well, we didn't sit in a room. We sat on a call. We whiteboarded ideas. We brought our experiences from other organizations to the table. We're looking at, what's the current regulatory landscape look like right now? Reputational. Juniper at the time had just come off, in 2017, not just, but an FCPA violation. Yeah. So, there was a lot of momentum from leadership to put in place a best-in-class program that not only met the DOJ guidelines or sentencing guidelines, but that exceeded them. And so we all collectively came to the table with that expectation. Yeah. But a lot of organizations who go through something like that, they end up kind of fumbling the ball. That momentum dies off, and it's 2 years after, a major event like that. And, it's just kind of back to the old way. So that's interesting that you were able to kind of grab the baton, so to speak, and keep that sort of moving forward.
what were some of like the most major hooks that you put in? Because that's really what it kind of comes down to, I guess. It was like, you're putting hooks in the business, you're adding some kind of value that allows you to sort of stay embedded and not just be, quote unquote, weeded out. What were some of those strategic things? And as you're thinking of that answer, I just want to make kind of 2 points. One, it would have been very easy to fumble the ball and, give yourselves an out and say, well, it would have been, we had this vision, but it was really hard because it was COVID and everyone was work from home and there was like so much chaos. And I think there's always opportunity in chaos, and you obviously took advantage of that. So anyways, what were some of those hooks that allowed you to kind of stay embedded and maintain that momentum?
I'll go back and say, before I answer that specifically, a lot of it is our chief compliance officer was a visionary. I mean, truly, I think he should have been in marketing. I mean,
compliance is marketing at the end of the day, in my opinion.
It is, but he was a creative marketer. And I think that set us apart. So being a hook, I think that we really branded ourselves as more of a very creative function for the organization. I think it was, for us, that hook was how we branded ourselves.
The framing.
And, framing, branding, and how we did collectively as a team, but how we did as individuals as well. And I think what set us apart, for example, we developed best-in-class training, that we got 100% compliance for 5 years in a row.
Wow.
It was, when you have your CFO talking about your compliance training, you've done something right.
Totally.
So I think that in itself certainly was one of those levers. I think our communication campaigns that we did, whether it be, the Integrity and Compliance Day or Week or Integrity Influencers, I think those things really set us apart from what others viewed as kind of being traditional. In fact, I just had a colleague that left Juniper and went to another company, and that individual told me, they said, I've never worked with someone like your function within an organization at all, ever. And I thought that was great compliment, right?
Totally.
That, we weren't, again, we've used this word bolt on, but we weren't a bolt on, that we really, took the time to understand the business and understand the friction that was apparent in a transaction or day-to-day or whatever the case may be. So I think specifically, we branded ourselves, our training, our communications. I think that really set us apart.
There's so much to learn from marketing. I mean, I was kind of saying that as a joke, but I'm kind of not kidding. Marketing is just trying to influence some behavior for someone to make a purchase. And if you're going to be a good marketer, you have to get your brand right. And you have to really understand your ICP, your ideal customer profile. And all these things overlay with ethics and compliance. We're trying to drive behavior. We're trying to influence people to do something versus not do something else. And I think if we don't understand those ICPs, these people that we're trying to serve, these people who we're trying to influence, then you can't be anything else than a bolt-on. Like, what else are you going to do? Right. Of course, you're just going to be, ramming communication forward. That's not going to resonate. Marketing teams spend so much time trying to understand, not just, obviously it's a means to an end, but like, assuming you have a product, quote unquote, that is going to actually do some good for somebody else, you have to like pierce some kind of a veil of attention, and attention levels are dropping, right? And so if you can understand those problems and you can connect your solution to those problems in a meaningful way and build enough trust for someone to like, buy what you're selling, quote unquote, then you can, have a huge impact. Why do you think we struggle with that in this space? Because like what you're talking about is part and parcel with any sort of marketing department, any sort of chief marketing officer. But this is, this chief compliance officer you just referred to obviously is a unicorn, and obviously allowed for that momentum that was built during that FCPA violation to be sort of translated into something that actually sort of affected the business in a meaningful way. Is it a personality type thing, do you think? Is it a a fear of trying to adopt some of these principles from other departments that have sort of cracked this nut? Like, what do you think is at the root of it? And why is not every compliance department as influential as what yours was able to become?
Personality actually had a lot to do with it. The personality was one, when you think of, let me step back. So when you think of compliance officers, right, there's kind of a vision that comes to mind.
Yeah, stereotype.
Right? Mm-hmm. It's very stereotype. And so he couldn't be more opposite to that. So I think with the mentality of kind of marketing as sort of one of his building blocks, I think helped to create what we did. And I felt like I was in the marketing group because I worked so closely with them in terms of building out our campaigns and doing our fun, speak up reports, things that, we've been able to publish, and, working on communications to support, our annual code of conduct or whatever. So there was a lot of encouragement from our leadership to leverage that group. And I think it worked. It was advantageous for sure.
Yeah. I've done hundreds of these episodes now, and I haven't talked to one person that fits that stereotype that the rest of the business world has about a compliance officer, which I think is extremely interesting. And I think this story
So I'm the only one?
No, you don't. That stereotype of office of no and no, saying no to everything. I don't think that's what our industry is really populated with, but we end up kind of taking on that sort of stereotype and almost and not doing anything to disrupt it or shatter that stereotype. And I think a good lesson from this experience that you're talking about at Juniper is that you had this sort of unicorn chief compliance officer that maybe had a sort of diametrically opposed almost personality to that stereotype. And he was comfortable enough leaning into it and comfortable enough setting a vision that allowed everybody else on your team to really live out those sort of unicorn qualities that they have. And in persuasion or in influence, one of the most powerful things is this concept of a pattern interrupt. I'm expecting this and I get something that's totally opposite. That break in the pattern, animals have this, right? Animals, when they're looking at we notice motion, right? If a lion is looking at a grass, if a lion is looking, your
analogies, I love your analogies.
But if a lion is looking at the grass, it's not going to see the zebra until the zebra moves, or it's not going to see the antelope until it moves. And so that's an interruption of the pattern, and now that can drive some action. We all have the opportunity to break whatever patterns that we have. We all have the opportunity to show up in a different way. And I think it just takes kind of spreading your wings and stepping out of the nest a little bit and trying it. At the end of the day, we're trying to influence behavior. No one's going to read a long, a super long policy, right? We have to break those patterns. And I think what it also should do is give people hope that you can turn a ship quickly. What you're talking about didn't take 10 years to get embedded. In a relatively short amount of time, it sounds like you were able to show up in a different way, carry that momentum forward and begin to start actually influencing some behaviors. 100% completion rate or a CFO saying anything other than something negative is wild, right?
Right. I absolutely think we broke the mold, and it was unfortunate that how things turned out, because we were super excited on, executing on 2.0, 3.0. Yeah. Our plans for AI integration kind of got stop-start. So there was so much more. So I feel like as I'm looking at my next opportunity is taking that momentum and taking that Juniper experience to the next level. And I feel that I'm well poised to do that. But unfortunately, to your point, is that there's so many people that are not like me that are out there that are making those decisions, right? And aren't necessarily ready for an ICG 2.0 or whatever it is, that just haven't embraced how important it is to be a part of something that's bigger.
Well, I think it's just they haven't seen it. It's hard for some people to imagine something that they haven't experienced or witnessed themselves. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so it's hard to, I don't know what an example of this is, but like, if you haven't seen it before, it's hard to like hire for that, or it's hard to like, everybody's not a visionary. Everybody is not like able to imagine, what could be and so forth. But it does feel like, I've been in this industry now for like a decade. It does feel like the rate of, newness, or the rate of like, visionary style compliance folks has increased kind of tremendously over the last couple of years. Like,
for sure.
There's a new openness to it, I think.
There is, but I think there's still a small percentage of people that have embraced that.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
I really do.
It might be, I'm a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed kind of a guy, and so it might be a big percentage.
Yeah. So I think that, individuals coming into this industry, I think the skill set and the mindset is completely different when I entered it, right? For sure.
And it's kind of an exciting time, I think.
Well, it's very transformational. It's very pivotal.
Well, it can be, and it doesn't need to be a bolt-on thing. It can really add so much value to an organization. And I think, the more conversations like this that I have, the more it reinforces this confidence that I have in our industry and in the impact that it can have on organizations. It doesn't have to be a bumper sticker on the car. It can be something that actually influences behavior, that actually de-risks the organization, helps it, run down the road of commerce a lot faster.
For sure. And I think the key is that with any compliance, entering into a new role, it's taking the time, going back to being an active listener, understanding, what compliance means to them, where their pain points are, where they see someone like me can add value. And then they see that carrying out, and that just builds trust and credibility for yourself and for your team.
Yeah. I mean, it really does go back to that curiosity thing, because that curiosity is the antithesis of any defensiveness that's rooted in insecurity. And when you're showing up, seeing how can I help the business be more successful? How can I help you in this other department achieve your goals in a more meaningful and, quote unquote, compliant way? It really opens up a lot of room for creativity. And it really does help with this thing of like, I'm always talking about like making better bets with our time, or the Pareto principle. And like, you do a bunch of things, and really only a small portion of those things are the things that like move the needle most. So the game is not doing things, it's doing the right things. And I think the more context we can get from understanding authentically what someone is going through, or what the challenges of a different department are, allow us to, increase the number, or the rate at which our activities actually are meaningful.
Well, exactly. And it's not just what I can do. This is what I bring to the table to help enable you to be able to do, right? So that we're mitigating risk. We're, maintaining, they understand, from a regulatory, even from a reputational. I mean, I was around the table in a tough conversation with individuals, and I said, we're not violating anything here, but there's a reputational component that you need to consider business in making this decision. But at the end of the day, I've given you my perspective, but it really comes down to reputation. So it's not only regulatory, it's reputational, it's operational. There's all those risks.
Right. Okay. So we are getting right to the end here. I got two final questions for you. What do you think, like, the next generation of compliance professional, like what kind of skills and mindsets are going to separate the great ones from the good ones? Like, what are some of those kind of base level kind of qualities or mindsets or mentalities that, some of us need to kind of maybe shine a little bit more, or try to develop to really elevate?
Well, it's been a theme throughout today, our conversation. Curiosity and critical thinking, I think, are key. Asking the why. Right? Just seeing beyond the rules and understanding the context, the business context. Mm-hmm. I think that's adaptability. Our industry right now is so changing so fast. Mm-hmm. Technology, geopolitical changes, all of those things. So, someone to, embrace that adaptability mindset, influence and communication. That's key. That's key to being a part of a program like Juniper, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is persuading and guiding leaders and employees without relying on necessary authority. Data literacy. We haven't talked about data at all, but that's huge, right? Using metrics and insights. So really coming up to speed on that data literacy piece, and ethical courage, making ethical decisions and speaking up. And yesterday, it's not only speaking up, but listen up. I think that was on something that came up yesterday. I thought that was a great one. I circled that. I jotted it down and circled it up. So I think these are mindsets that not only help to manage risk effectively, but also elevate compliance as a true business enabler.
Yeah, we can't enable business unless we're business people. And we're not going to be business people unless we speak the language of business and understand what actually matters for the business in the minds of the people who we're trying to influence. Back to that ICP understanding,
Yes.
Point.
It's funny. I had a business leader come up to me. I know you have another question. I had a business leader come up to me and said, I'd hire you into sales, Angie. I said, I don't know anything. And they was like, you've got the most critical piece of the puzzle of being a good salesperson.
Which is listening and curiosity. And honestly, that's really at the core of it.
Right. Yeah. So I thought, oh, well, maybe I could have a role in.
Another chapter in the book here. All right. Last question.
My pivot. Okay. Last
question. Go
question.
back in time to a young Angie. What piece of advice do you wish you had?
I don't know if it was a best piece of advice. I think I've always had this, is the importance of building relationships, I think, is huge in any industry. So for me, and understanding the business as much as knowing what the rules are.
Mm-hmm.
And
we can't put the cart before the horse. And the cart in that analogy is the compliance program. We have to understand the horse first,
Right. And seeking to understand. I think that's, I'm always telling my kids, seek to understand. Always go in from that position of having that knowledge before you, provide decision or provide advice. Seek to understand.
I love it. This was so fun. Thank you so much for coming, Angie.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I appreciate it, and look forward to chatting again soon.
Absolutely. See you next time.
All right. Take care.